When the subject of God comes up, there are several questions that seem to arise naturally. Here are some of them, and among them are the questions of what God is made of, where God lives, and who created God. And I'm hoping to tackle these questions in this presentation. So subscribe, hit the like button and the notify button, and off we go. So I want to start off by thinking about two different categories of being, and they've got technical terms. They're called contingent and necessary beings, but they're quite simple ideas, even though they've got complicated names. So let's look up, first of all, the idea what we mean by when we talk about something being contingent. So a contingent entity is an entity which could be different from what it is. This presentation, for example, could be different. It could be different length. I could have got the spelling mistakes out. It could be more interesting, who knows? But the point is it could be different. And if you've got an entity which could be different, then we're looking for an explanation of why that entity is like what it is. One of the ways that it could be different is it didn't exist. So maybe this entity in another reality, no one wrote one, so it didn't exist. So any entity that might not exist, that's contingent as well. And a contingent entity requires an explanation. So if something exists, we have to explain why it exists. It's a contingent entity, or if it's like a particular thing, let's try and explain why it is like what it is. If we want to know why it's like what it is, then we have to explain that. And that requires some other entity to explain the contingent entity. So I've got a contingent entity and it's something else to explain why it's like what it is. This presentation is contingent, could be different. So we say, why is it like what it is? Well, the answer is I wrote it, and I wrote it like this. So it's got a cause, and contingent entities have causes. They require a cause. If you've got a contingent entity, you know there's a cause for that contingent entity, and that will be some other entity. And I'm going to draw that in a diagram like that. There's a contingent entity, and it has a cause. There's an arrow which shows the cause causing the contingent entity. The other kind of entity we talk about is a necessary entity. So a necessary entity can't be different. It can't not exist. It must be as it is. No matter what reality you're looking at, the necessary entity has to be there. It's necessary. And that means that we don't need anything else to explain why a necessary entity is as it is. It couldn't be any different. It couldn't stop existing. There'd be no time when it didn't exist. A necessary entity must be there. And we don't need any other entity to explain it. So this idea of cause and effect, we don't need a cause for a necessary entity. We can do away with it. The necessary entity is self-sufficient. It exists without us needing a cause for it. Okay, let's think what happens when we get a whole set of entities together. So we start off one entity, it's a contingent entity. It needs an explanation. And we can think of that as a set containing one contingent entity, and the set has an explanation. The entity, only entity in it requires an explanation, so the set requires an explanation. And let's suppose that explanation is another contingent entity, another entity that requires an explanation. Well, we haven't really got ourselves anywhere, because we've now got a set of two entities which requires an explanation. So the set requires an explanation because everything in it requires an explanation, or at least one of the things in it requires an explanation, and that might explain the rest, but we need an explanation for the whole set. Well, there we are, we've got another contingent entity, and all that's happened now is we've got a bigger set which still has to have an external explanation. There has to be something outside, some cause outside that set that caused it. And we can go on for a long time and have a whole lot of other contingent entities in the set. Every time we add a contingent entity, we just make the contingent set bigger. We still need an entity outside to explain it. So if you have another contingent entity, you add that to the set, it doesn't turn it into a necessary set. The set is still contingent. It still has to have a cause which is outside itself. And no matter how big the set is, even if it becomes infinitely large, we still have to have a cause that is outside that set. Adding another entity doesn't make it into a necessary set. It's still contingent, still requires a cause. Even if we do that forever and an infinite number of times, we are still in the point where we need an explanation. The only way we can say we have an explanation for the whole lot is if there is some entity that is necessary that doesn't require a cause, which caused something in the set that could cause the rest of it. So that's a nice rigorous picture of what's going on. If there's a contingent entity, then there must be a chain of cause and event, and that must start with a necessary entity. So there has to be something which the whole existence of the whole set rests on. Okay, that's what we've just shown. The existence of a contingent entity requires the existence of another entity to explain it. And that cause of change, cause and event must start with a necessary entity. And when we think about the universe, we'll see that the universe is contingent. There was a point before which there was no universe. Some people call it the Big Bang. Some people call it the creation event, but there was some point where the universe came into existence. And that means that because the universe is not necessary, should I say, it's contingent, outside the universe, there is a necessary entity who caused it. Might have caused it through agents, but in the end, it all goes back to a necessary entity who caused the universe to come into existence. And the Bible calls that entity God. Well, that argument is logically complete and it's mathematically rigorous. Unfortunately, it's fairly involved. Have I presented it reasonably well? Is my presentation convincing? Let us know what you think about it in the comments, and we'll see if we can do something more to improve it if it's not up to scratch. Anyway, what does that tell us about God? Well, first thing it tells us is that God is outside the universe. God isn't made up of the universe. He's outside it, and he isn't made of things that make up the universe. So he's not made of anything in the universe. So we talk about what the physical nature of God is. Well, it isn't a physical nature if by physical you mean made of the things that make up the universe. God is not like that. And the second thing we can get is that the God made everything in the universe. He made the physical laws that make the universe work. He made all the matter in the universe. There's nothing in the universe that can limit what God is like. In fact, the only thing that can limit God is God himself. He can choose to limit himself, but apart from that, there are no limits on it. And what's interesting there is that that's unlike the God of the atheist, especially the God of the new atheists, but the God of any atheists. If you read a book like God Delusion or God is Not Great, they're all talking about a God who is a sort of big version of the Norse gods, or the God of thunder, or the God of lightning, or the God of rain, or something. The God of the Bible isn't like that. The God of the Bible is outside the universe, and the universe doesn't limit the God of the Bible. The atheists are talking about a totally different God, and it's worthwhile remembering that if you ever end up talking to an atheist. What else? Well, we know that God is a necessary being. What does that mean about it? Well, first of all, nothing created God. God didn't just come into existence at any point. God has always been there, and God must always be there, and he always will be there. There won't be a point where God ceases to exist. God is from everlasting to everlasting, as the Bible puts it. no beginning, has no end. God is always there. And nothing can limit what God does, just what God chooses to limit himself to. He can choose not to do something, or he can choose to do it. That's up to God. And the last thing, of course, is that everything else, everything that exists, everything in the universe depends on God for its existence. And that's quite interesting, because in the Bible, the name of God, well, it comes from the phrase I am. It's only one word actually in Hebrew, but it's English, it's several words. The words I am talk about God. So there we go. This is in Exodus chapter 3. Moses is talking to God. God is sending Moses to deliver the children of Israel from Egypt. And Moses asks God, he says, if I come to the people of Israel, I say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask me, what is his name? He says, what shall I say to them? In other words, he's asking God what his name is. And there's God's answer. God said to Moses, I am who I am. He says to the people of Israel, I am has sent me to you. It's an interesting name for the God on whom the existence of everything else depends, but who automatically exists, who must exist. This is the God who exists. This is the God who made everything else come. Now, that text there was written about 1400 BC or thereabouts, written 3,400 years ago in the Middle Bronze Age. And it's quite interesting, of course. There's no one that knew about the Big Bang. No one had solved Einstein's field equations at that point, and even made iron implements. So for the Bible to tell you this about God is quite an amazing thing just in its own right. Anyway, it's the name of God, I am, and God says, this is my name forever, thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. God's name is a derivation from the word for I am. One other point we ought to look at, there are people who say, well, it says in the Bible that God is spirit, so maybe God is made out of something called spirit. Maybe he is, but it doesn't help us very much because we don't know what spirit is anyhow. And there are other statements of a similar kind. God is love. All that tells us is that God is very loving. God is a consuming fire. It means God is very interested in right and wrong, and is prepared to act in judgment. God is light. He's talking about the truth of God. God is light, in him there's no darkness. God reveals truth. These are metaphoric statements, and it's possible that the phrase God is spirit is also a metaphorical statement. So we have to be careful about that when we think about the nature of God. The important point is that God made the universe. God made the laws of nature that make the universe work, but they don't apply to God. So when it comes down to it, we can't know what God is like. It's not made of anything that makes up the universe. Well, we hope that you found this video interesting and informative, and there are lots more videos on this channel. Some of them are on similar topics. All of them are about God. So if you like this one, why don't you subscribe to the channel and look out for new presentations? We are on average release one every week. And if there's some topic that you'd like us to look at, or there's a question you'd like us to answer, please let us know in the comments. We'll try to accommodate you. We'll either try and answer it in the comments, or we may make a video about it, which we'll release later on. So thanks for listening all right to the end, and see you on another video.